Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about how to make a fruit wine. What I really should say is a sugar wine, and the reason for that is we're actually going to be using granulated sugar for the yeast to eat instead of the juices from the fruit to eat in order to make the alcohol. We're going to be using the fruit to flavor the water and the sugar to get the flavor profile we want for the yeast that's going to make the alcohol for us. So this is a sugar wine, but you can use this with any kind of flowers or herbs or fruit. It's going to be a lot of fun depending on what you want to make. What we're going to do today is we're going to do a blackberry wine. So today we're starting with a very simple recipe. It's going to be 1 gallon of water. We're going to do a 1 gallon batch. So it's just 1 gallon of water, 2 pounds of sugar, and 3 pounds of blackberries, and a package of yeast. That's it. It's very simple as far as ingredients go. You'll need some basic equipment, and to start off with, we'll need what we call the primary. Now, the primary fermenter is a 2-gallon bucket like this for a 1 gallon batch, and on top here we have a little airlock that I filled with water halfway to the fill line. Now you can actually make your own very easy. Home Depot sells 2-gallon plastic paint buckets with lids. You can go ahead and grab one of those, just drill a little hole and put a rubber gasket in it for your airlock. That easy. So this one here, I like getting these ones from the manufacturer because it has on the side here your different measurements as far as how many gallons are in there, so you can see, how much you actually have in there. What's going to happen is you want a 2-gallon bucket because we are adding fruit, which is going to be adding more volume to our 1 gallon mix. So we're actually going to have more volume in the initial phases than 1 gallon. So you got to have room for your brew to be able to expand. And then when you add the yeast and it starts percolating away, it can foam up and bubble as well. So you want to make sure you have room for all of that to happen. So 2-gallon bucket with an airlock. This is your primary fermenter. It's called primary because this is where your process begins in this bucket before we rack over to our secondary, and I'll show you how to do that later. So we're going to start off with opening this up. We're going to take our primary bucket here, and I'm going to add 1 gallon of water. Now I'm actually using hot water straight from my tap, and the reason I'm doing that is that when I'm adding the fruit, the hot water is going to help expand the cell structure in the fruit, and I am using frozen blackberries. Now I like freezing my fruit because the act of freezing it breaks down the cell structure. We get more juice and flavor out of the fruit than we would if it was fresh. There's nothing wrong with using fresh. If I'm using fresh, I do recommend that you would take it and squeeze it a little bit because you want to try and break the skins a little bit to get some of that flavor and stuff past the skins of the fruit, because what's going to happen is it won't leach out into here very fast. So you want to make sure you get as much flavor as you can. So here we go. Here's my 1 gallon of water. Now, before we started this, I did wash my hands and make sure that whenever you do stuff like this, that you're making food for other people, wash your hands. Always be sanitary in the kitchen and with your supplies as well. The other thing I did was I sanitized this bucket. I used either Be Bright or Star Sand. You add it to water, you let it sit in the bucket, and it cleans all the organic matter in here. You don't want to use soap and water when you're cleaning these out. And the reason why is because over time, that soap residue, which does not come out, will actually start to have a negative effect on your brew flavor profile. Things will taste very disgusting. So you want to try and use brewing supplies for that. Make sure that it's a good cleaner. So I use Be Bright. A lot of people like Star Sand. It's simply what's available to you. So we have our primary. It's got the water in it. Now we're going to take our 2 pounds of sugar. We're going to mix that in next. And having warm water also is going to help the sugar mix through a lot easier. Now, if you wanted something that's a little bit of a higher alcohol content, you could add more than 2 pounds of sugar. A lot of fruit wines will call for anywhere from 2 to 2.5 pounds of sugar for a 1 gallon batch. It's entirely up to you for taste and how you like it. So I'm getting this all mixed up in here. And then for the fruit, I went to the local Walmart. I got some frozen blackberries. I like getting them there simply because they're the big juicy ones. We grow blackberries here at home, but a lot of them are small. They don't have a lot of juice to them. So they actually don't have a lot of flavor to them. They taste great, but it's really not enough to make a fruit wine. So we got that all mixed in. Now I'm going to take a sock like this. This is a nylon bag. And you don't have to use this. I can just take these blackberries and I can just dump them right in. I like to use this simply because when I'm done, before I rack things over into my secondary, I can pull this whole bag right out instead of trying to get my siphon and stuff past all the fruit that's floating in there. So I can make sure that I get everything out, squeeze what's out in the bag, and then I've got the maximum amount of juice and flavor in here before I rack over. So I'm going to go ahead and take my 2 pounds of frozen blackberries, and you know, they're a pretty good size, and that's kind of what you want. You want something that's got a lot of juice to it, a lot of color already, and this is going to give a nice, beautiful color to it. As it sits and ferments, it is going to change color, and don't worry about that. It will turn anywhere from a deep purple to a light brown, especially with blackberries. That's actually kind of normal. That's not a problem. So just going to put these in here. Try not to dump any on the floor. All right. And then I'm just going to do a loose knot around the top. You don't want to tie it too tight, simply because after it's been sitting in here for a while fermenting, it's going to get tighter, and then you don't have to try and use your fingernails to try and pull it apart afterwards, because these bags are reusable. So we got our 2 pounds of blackberries in here. I'm going to go ahead and add that to my sugar mix. And then I'm just going to give my sugar mix just another little swirl here. There we go. And then I'm just going to make sure that I tamp the bag down so it's fully submerged. It's tied shut so the fruit isn't going to come out. It's just going to sit there, and it's already turning a nice little purple. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to test the standard gravities, all right? Because we have one ingredient left to add, and that's the yeast. So what we're going to do is we're going to test standard gravity. That's going to tell us how thick of a mixture this is, which will also tell us how much alcohol we can expect to get if we finish brewing all the way to a 1.0. Standard gravity, your base measurement is 1.0, which means it's the same consistency as water. That's our common denominator in all of this. So we are hoping for anywhere between a 1.05 to a 1.09 for a fruit sugar wine. And let's see how close we got. This here is a hydrometer. Okay, and these are pretty cheap. You can get them at most of your brewing supply places. On one side, it's got the numbers from your number scale, and on, if you flip it over the back side, it tells you about roughly how much alcohol you can expect to get out of that percentage, assuming that it goes from that percent down to 1.0. And there's some other formulas you can use to figure that out as well, but this is a really simple, cheap, easy way to do it. Now, I always do this at the beginning of the process so that we know what we're going to get in the end, because I also keep a journal with all of my recipes. So as I go through, I can tweak things. I can add more sugar to less fruit, do more fruit, and I can slowly start to work out, especially with 1 gallon batches, a flavor profile that I really like before I upscale to a 5 gallon batch. So we're going to go ahead and measure this and see what we came out with. Now, I've got really good tap water here, so I'm on a well, so it doesn't really bother me at all. However, there are people who are, if you're on city water, I'd recommend getting spring water or bottled water. You don't want any of the stuff they use to soften and treat water to get into your mix. It can actually cause some off flavors that are out of your control. So that was one thing I forgot to mention there in the beginning. There we go. You're going to want to fill this just about 2/3 of the way. See that lovely pink color that we have? That's just from it sitting there already. And then when I drop this in, I'm just going to give it just a little bit of a spin, and that just keeps it from sticking to the side and getting stuck. So it's floating right in the middle. And then I'm going to read the numbers on it and see what we got. and we are right at 1.08, which is a great place to be. That's going to be just about a 10%, anywhere from 10 to 12% alcohol, which is a classic table wine. So that's right where I want to be. So if you find that you want more thickness to it, add more sugar, and that will get your increase in alcohol. And dump that back in. Rinse these off. All right. So now that we know what our standard gravities are, we have our sugar, our berries, and our water mixed up, we still need to add the yeast. Now what I'm using for today is Lavlin 71B. This is a pretty good general all-purpose yeast for wine and for mead as well. There is another one that I will sometimes use, the Côte de Blanc, which is made by Red Star yeast. It's another good one as far as fruit wines go. I like it because it doesn't leave its own kind of flavor behind. Different yeasts can leave their own flavor profiles behind. Some of them will come out tasting like liquid bread. So if you want to avoid that, you start experimenting with different yeasts. I like the Côte de Blanc, but I also really like the 71B from Lavlin. It's very good to use. So I'm just going to go ahead and open it up and dump it in. Now, if you look at the back of the package, it'll tell you to put it in a starter with hot water and a little bit of milk or egg and get it started. You don't actually have to do that. You can actually just go ahead, open it, and put it right in. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Most of the brewers I know, that's what we actually do. I'm going to go ahead and dump this in. There we go. All right, now I'm just going to take my lid and put that on here. Now remember what I said about using a 2-gallon bucket for a 1-gallon batch. My water level inside right now when I added the fruit is up to there. Well, that's like 1.5 gallons already. So we want to make sure that you do have that room to be able to grow. So just make sure you use your 2-gallon bucket. Once you've got this put together like this, we're going to let this sit for about 5 to 8 weeks in the primary before we rack it over. Now, in order to test if it's ready to be racked over, we want to take our hydrometer again. We're going to test it again, and we're looking for anything between the range of 1.03 to 1.05. If it's in that range, go ahead and rack it over to your secondary. And the reason for that is that you want to get this sitting off of its lees, which is what we call all the sediment that settles out at the bottom. That is your expended fruits that might come through. Also, you'll see a sludge at the bottom. That is actually dead yeast. That's natural. So what we're doing is we're going to siphon off of that, and we're going to rack it over. That's what we call that process, is racking it over into a secondary. And I'll show you in a moment how we do that. That way we get it off of the lees, so we don't have any of that dead yeast and stuff throwing continual flavors in, and we're continuing the process. If you go to test it and it's already at 1.0, don't panic. They're totally fine. Go ahead and rack it right over, and you're just waiting for it to clarify at that point so you can bottle it and drink it. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on the floor, and I'm going to keep this in my kitchen here where it's a pretty average temperature. You don't want to store it somewhere where it's too hot or too cold. You want to be kind of room temperature between 60 and 75. You don't really want to go over 75. So you just set this out of the way. Don't put it in direct sunlight. And then just wait, and then measure and see if it's ready. All right, and now we're going to go over how we rack things over from the primary to the secondary. Now in this one here, what I've actually got is a Netherlands mead with peach. This I actually have racked over once out of my bucket into this. However, it needs to be racked again. It just went from 1.05 to 1.0. So I'm going to be racking this over again. This is exactly the same process that we would for going from our 5-gallon bucket or a 1-gallon bucket into a carboy. The carboys are these glass jars here. So we've got this one here, and you see that it's still cloudy, but you've got all that sediment there on bottom. So we're going to be siphoning off of that and putting it over into a clean bottle. And then because the fermentation has reached 1.0, the fermentation in this is actually done. So all we're doing now is we're going to be waiting for it to clarify, for all the sediments and pectins to settle out and just fall down to the bottom before we rack it a final time to bottle it. So what I have here is my favorite tool, the auto siphon. Rather than just taking a tube and sticking it in there and then trying to get some suction going with your mouth and then putting it in, this is much safer. It's a lot easier, less aggravating. This is just a 1 gallon auto siphon with 5/16 inch plastic tubing. You can get the tubing at Home Depot, easy to replace over time. So I'm going to pop the top, the airlock on this. And I've got my handy dandy label on this. I'm going to go ahead and switch that over now so I don't forget what is in this one. I'm going to stick the tube into the receiving bottle. There we go. And then I'm going to stick this right here in. I'm going to keep my hand on the on the auto siphon, and that's just to keep it straight up and down so it's not moving around on the bottom or trying to float up. And it's actually going to set it right on the bottom of the jar. And then we're just going to give this a little pumping action to get the suction started. There we go. And you can see that it's already started filtering in through here. One thing I'm going to do to make things go a little bit quicker is I'm actually going to take this and put it in my sink so that it's a little bit lower in elevation than this bottle, which will actually make the siphon go a lot smoother, a lot quicker. So I'm just going to set that right down here. There we go. And we just want to do this without upsetting as much as we can in here so that nothing on the bottom floats back up. We're just siphoning it off. So as I said before, at this point when you're racking things over, we're getting it off of the leaves that are down at the bottom. We're getting our liquid over into the next one. Now if it was totally clarified, I would be bottling at this point. But it's not clarified, as you can see, right? It's still a little bit cloudy. And so we're going to just let time do its thing, right? This is not something you want to rush. So this is the same for mead and for wine. You know, just let time do its thing. There are some different things you can use out there to be able to clarify, but they're not always the best option. So I usually find that just a little bit of patience and time will give you a nice clear drink, and also a great flavor. Whenever something reaches 1.0 and it's clarified, it's ready to drink. There is no rule or law that says you have to wait a year or 2 years in order for it to drink. It's ready to go when you want it to be at that point. You just want to make sure you've gotten down to 1.0, or if it's stuck at 1.02 and just not going any further than that, that's fine too. As long as we know the fermentation is stopped and it's not going anywhere, you're ready to drink. Now, things will have a little bit of a vinegar taste to it, the younger that they are. And some people like that. Sometimes it's actually an asset to whatever flavor you're doing. My blueberry wine actually tastes really good between 6 months and a year. And then the older it gets, the more it becomes like a port. And both are really tasty and great. It's just a matter of what you like for flavor. But whenever you bottle something, it's ready to drink. You can go ahead and start enjoying it. If you have time and patience, you can let it sit and just keep an eye on it. Crack open a bottle, see how it tastes after a while. I got some wines here that are 5 years old and they're just absolutely phenomenal. When I bottled them when they're brand new, I thought they were absolutely disgusting. You never know. Sometimes they taste really good, and then as time goes on, they don't age well. That can be quite popular with fruit wines especially. They usually last about 2 years. You can get some that last later, but usually about 2 years is what you can expect out of a fruit wine. And then with meads, it really depends on the mead, but a lot of meads, I've had some really great meads that are 8, 9 years old. I've had some really great ones that are 6 months old. It depends on what you're going for. So as soon as you bottle it, it's ready to drink. Enjoy. So at this point, we're almost done siphoning here. Now we're talking about bottling, and because I'm doing wine and mead, I am doing your traditional wine bottles with a cork. You can use a flip top bottle. That's totally fine as well. I usually use those for cordials. With your corks, I like to use a number 9. A number 9 is a little bit thicker, so you're going to get a tighter seal. And what that does is over time, if you're going to hang on to something that's longer than a year or 2 years, think about using a thicker cork so that it doesn't let any of that moisture out that could possibly happen with a number 8 cork. Number 8 is totally fine. They're easy to remove from bottles. So you know, it's going to be a short-term use. Absolutely use number 8. It's easier on everybody's wine corks, especially when you're trying to pull them out at an event. You know, you're trying to pull it out and it's stuck in there. A lot of times it's because we used, you know, an oversized 9 because we're trying to make sure we have a good seal for longevity. But go ahead and, you know, use either one that you'd like. I just use number 9. You know, that really just refers to the diameter of the cork. And when you look at your corks, when you buy them in the store, it'll tell you the different dimensions of them and try them out. Now, you can just leave it at that. You can just cork it in the bottle and be done. But I like to take it one step further, and what I actually do is I put wax on top of my cork and my bottle. Not necessarily a period thing, but it's one of those things where it adds a little bit of visual class to it, and it also will help keep your cork from possibly drying out as well. You know, it seals everything in, but I really like the way that it looks. And one of the things that I have actually done, I can let go of that now, it's not moving around on me. So this here is a fortified mead that I did, and I have a gold wax on it. And what you do is you just buy those the wax beads. They come in a bag. Put it in a metal coffee can and put that right on the stove to warm it up, because the coffee can you can just reheat over and over without having to sacrifice a pot or a pan to it. So then what you want to do is when it's warm, let it start cooling down a little bit. If you try and dip this in right away, it's actually going to be too hot for the wax, and the wax will just run right off and be very thin. So you want to just let it start to cool down, and then as it's cooling down, I just take the bottles, dip it upside down, and then I rotate like this. And what that does is it lets this bead of your excess wax grow right here, and it will drip off. And then as it slows down, because it's cooling down, then I can ease it up, and you get this nice, somewhat smooth top onto it, and a nice wax seal on it. The other thing I like about using the wax is I use 2 different color waxes, so that when things are sitting in my wine rack like this, I can look at it very quickly and know what it is. And by that I mean I have a gold wax, which I use for all of my meads. And then I have black wax, which I use for all of my wines. And I can look right at it and go, okay, my wines are right here, my meads are right here. And it just helps me very quickly get into the right zone of where I'm looking on my wine rack for what I'm looking for. So just a fun little thing to try out. You can also do shrink wraps. Shrink wraps are pretty cheap. However, what's not cheap is the shrink wrap machine. It's about $225. So I find that the wax is a cheap, easy way to go. It looks great. It's close enough to period that people really appreciate it. And these make really great gifts. So I hope you guys enjoy. Keep brewing, try new things, and expand from here. I hope to be able to try some of your stuff in the future.